Welcome to Atheon Analytics Tutorials. In this video we're going to be looking at how to use the pivot table in Omniscope. So we're starting in our usual table view and we're going to change straight away using the drop down menu to a pivot view. Now a pivot view in the terms of Omniscope is a way of aggregating data by an X and a Y axis. So it's essentially a way of creating a summary table. So just to navigate the screen quickly, we can see down in the bottom right we have our X-axis selector, and in the top left we have our Y-axis selector. So we can quickly change the axes just using the drop-down menus that will be familiar in any other views. So for example, if I want to make my X-axis based on my column called year, using the selector I now select the column year, and you can see I now have two columns on my X-axis, one for 2005 and one for 2006, i.e. the years that happen to be in this data set. On my Y-axis it's currently set to subcategory, and in this case we're going to change this to brand. So now we have an aggregated table or a summarised table showing by our various brands year on year our number of records. So again, as with all views in Omniscope, it's defaulted to showing us the number of records or the number of rows of data. And just like in the pie view and the bar view, we can change the metric very quickly by using a drop-down menu. So now we're going to change this from number of records of data to sales value. And we can now see the various sales values. Now at the moment the default colouring in Omniscope is a sort of shades of blue, but we can overlay colour to actually give us more sense of the data, so to sort of convey some patterns within the metrics itself. So the way we're going to do that in this case, using the style button up at the top left, I'm going to click on style and then navigate to data colours, and in this case there's lots of different options, but I'm going to show you one which in the diverging colours goes from red to green. So using diverging colours like this, it allows us to show low numbers being in red and high numbers being in green, and you can see as I'm scrolling down the table here we can see any large numbers in green, and we've got various shades of orange in between. Now I'm just going to reset this data so that I'm looking at a like-for-like period. So I'm going to use my weeks filter bar on the right hand side just to filter to a like-for-like set of data. So now we're looking at real measures year on year for 2005-2006. So we're looking at sales values. Actually, to make this table a bit smaller, we're going to just go back to looking at, rather than brand, let's look at pack type. So now we can see a table which is showing us for both of our years the sales value by pack type by year. Now the pivot table can be really useful also to show us differences or growth percentages. So here I'm going to calculate automatically the growth percentage from 2005 to 2006. The way we do that, using the tools button, I'm going to show a difference column, and you'll see it automatically puts a difference column in between the 2 years that I've selected, so it's showing me the percentage growth. Now in all pivot views, by default we have a total column on the right hand side and a total row along the bottom. So the row is just summarising the data above it, and the column obviously summarising the data in the various columns to the left. And if we want to sort this table, we can do it very quickly. So by clicking on the total column, we can sort it from highest to lowest. Click again to sort from lowest to highest, and click again to put the data back into its original order. We can also sort using any column heading, so such as 2006, I can sort the data, or indeed by the difference percentage. So we've got the highest percentage growth, lowest, and back to our original order again. So here we're looking at about 24,000 records of data, and I know that by looking up at the blue bar in the top right of the screen. But on screen itself we can only actually see about 20 or 30 numbers. So there's a sense of aggregation here. It's summed up the data for us depending on the two axes that we've set. So because here we're looking at the various pack types by year in our summary table, it's added up all the raw data behind that and given us a total for the sales number. So the aggregation function it's used here is to sum the data. Now that makes perfect sense normally when we're looking at sales, but there are some examples where that aggregation function doesn't necessarily make sense. So for example, if we change this data now, rather than looking at sales, we're going to look at profit percentage. Immediately, Omniscope has applied the same logic as before, and it's decided to sum up all of that data. So we get all of our profit percentages added together and we get these ridiculous high numbers. So in this sense, we don't want to necessarily sum the data. We want to apply a different aggregation function. So we want to, when we're looking at profit percentage, we want to look at a mean of the data, and if we're technically correct, obviously we want to do a weighted mean. So the way we're going to do that, using our drop-down menu on the value selector, down at the bottom we've got a button there for function. Now we can see there's a number of options. It's defaulted to summing the data. In this case we're going to choose a mean. So now we've got a strict average of the percentages, and now if we want to weight them by our sales value, using our drop down menu again, we can go back into weight and weight by sales. So now we have a true weighted mean of profit percentage, and we have our percentage growth year on year. So at the click of a button we can see which pack type has got the biggest growth in profit year on year. So that's actually a very complicated calculation to do in Excel. It's done it all with the click of a button here, and of course, having set this table up, we can then change the aggregation or the summary level very easily. Firstly, we might want to change the axis, so rather than looking at this by pack type, I might want to look at it by subcategory or any of the categorizations that are in my data. And of course, I might want to look at it for a smaller number of weeks, so I can use my filters, or for a selection of subcategories. So just as before, all these reports are dynamic and we can use our filters to drill down into the data. So there's a whole variety of ways in which we can use pivot tables. In this case we're going to be looking at some promotional analysis. So I've selected my pivot table to show product by week, and I've looked at the various selling prices, and using colour again I can see changes in the data. So for example, where a selling price has gone down here up at the top, and we can do some very quick analysis by selecting that data and seeing how sales have gone, so we can judge whether or not it was a good promotion, and we can select more than one product and start to do some more in-depth of analysis, so such as halo analysis, cannibalization, i.e. what was the impact of product X on selling product Y. In this case we're using a pivot table to do supplier negotiations. I want to know which are my biggest growth suppliers year on year, so we've very quickly sorted them by the difference column, and now having made a selection in the pivot table we can see a breakdown of that data both year on year up in the line chart and the pie charts. And in this case I'm going to use a couple of pivot tables to break down some investigation of data that I'm doing. So I'm looking at the line chart up at the top, seeing an interesting sales trend, and when I select the bit of data that I'm interested in, the two pivot tables beneath are now breaking that data down for me year on year, depending on the various categorizations that I've used and I want to explore. All of these techniques can be taught in more detail on the Atheon Analytics Introduction to Omniscope course. For more information about that, please email info@atheon.com or give us a call on 08 444 145 501.